A flight attendant disrespected a black CEO mid-flight, but he calmly turned the situation around, shutting down the misconduct and making the crew face serious consequences before landing. He slapped the black CEO while announcing drinks, thinking a gesture could humiliate him mid-flight. He didn't realize the man he struck could break more than just his mic. Subscribe if you believe arrogance always meets unstoppable consequences. The slap came without warning. A sharp crack echoed through the cabin speakers. As the mic still clutched in Carrick Vale's hand bounced off Dr. Zayden Merrick's left cheek, the cabin fell into stunned silence. Mid-announcement, mid-sentence, mid-service, every eye turned. Zayden didn't flinch. His head shifted with the force of the strike, but his expression remained composed, even as the low hum of the aircraft seemed to pause with the collective breath of the passengers. He slowly turned his face back toward Carrick, the sting blooming on his cheek like a delayed insult. The slap hadn't been personal, it had been tactical, performative, and reckless. And it had been loud enough to be recorded on every phone now being raised with trembling fingers. Carrick stood there, still gripping the mic, eyes wide for a fraction of a second, before he composed himself and continued the beverage announcement like nothing had happened. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be coming through the aisle shortly with complimentary drinks. His voice faltered for the briefest second before rising again. Sparkling water, juice, or coffee? Zayden didn't move. Not yet. Not with adrenaline still humming through the air like static. His eyes remained locked on Carrick's, studying the forced professionalism, the way his jaw tightened, the unspoken aggression in the way he stepped sideways. The senior flight attendant's smile was a grim mask stretched across something meaner underneath. From a few rows back, someone whispered, "That's Zayden Marrick, the Aerathon guy, the one who caught that airline exec last year." Zayden heard it. So did Carrick. But the irony remained hidden to the man with the mic. He assumed Zayden was just another businessman. That would be his mistake. Zayden exhaled slowly, brushing his fingers lightly over the warm spot on his face. No blood, no visible mark. Just data, one more action to be logged, one more choice to be examined. He shifted in his first-class seat, posture relaxed but alert, letting the silence settle again as Carrick turned his back and walked up the aisle stiffly, his announcement trailing behind him. Phones came out. Passengers leaned into each other. The cabin had become a theater, and they knew something had just happened that didn't belong on a normal flight. Something unprofessional. Something dangerous. The captain's voice broke over the intercom. "Carrick, report to the front. Please. Now." The urgency was clipped but not panicked. He didn't know what had happened, but he sensed it wasn't small. Zayden's mind sharpened like a blade being drawn. The objective of this flight had been simple. Land in Venner City, finalize a billion-dollar contract, and return with the future of his company secured. But that objective had just changed. Now, something else needed landing, something uglier, buried inside Skirich's crew culture, perhaps inside Carrick himself. The slap wasn't random. It was a spark. And Zayden knew fire when he saw it. Carrick glanced back once, his posture rigid, his steps accelerating. Zayden noted the stiffness. Guilt didn't walk smoothly. He leaned back slowly, letting the whispering tension wash past him, eyes calm, expression unreadable. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about a slap. It was about something else. He didn't know what yet, but he would. He reached for the seat arm, not for support, but to feel the moment anchor in place. The metal felt cool, real, grounded. Across the cabin, phones continued recording. And then, softly, Zayden whispered, just loud enough for himself, "This will not end the way he expects." Carrick Vale burst through the cockpit door with a forced calm that crumbled the moment his shoes hit the carpeted aisle. His face was pale, brows drawn tight, and sweat lined the edge of his collar. The passengers saw it. They noticed the difference. His confident, antagonistic posture had wilted into something twitchy, almost desperate. Dr. Zayden Marrick didn't move at first. He simply watched from his seat, his breathing slow, his gaze narrowed. He could feel the shift. Something had happened behind that cockpit door, and whatever it was had rattled Carrick deeply. Carrick marched toward the drink carts, grabbing the metal handle as if it were a lifeline. "We'll resume service," he barked, the edge in his voice cracking ever so slightly. "Please remain seated." But nobody moved. No drinks were requested. No passenger spoke. They were watching something larger now. They had heard the echoing slap through the cabin speakers. They had seen the man in one and not retaliate, but instead calculate. Zayden stood up slowly, his frame steady, his tone disarmingly polite. "I'd like to speak with the captain," he said. Not loudly, not aggressively, just firmly enough to cut through the air. Carrick didn't even let him finish. "The captain is busy," he snapped, placing himself between Zayden and the front. The denial landed too quickly, too rehearsed, too defensive. That alone made Zayden's instincts flare. Something was wrong beyond Carrick's behavior. Something structural. A young male attendant stepped forward cautiously, Jaren Kaur, barely in his 20s, his hands slightly trembling as he approached. His voice was quiet, his eyes darting between Zayden and the crew. "He's done this before," Jaren whispered. "He's always protected by someone, no matter what happens." Zayden gave the slightest nod. That sentence wasn't just information. It was a lead. Someone higher up wanted Carrick in the air, wanted him untouchable. Without warning, Carrick spun around and snatched the intercom mic again, his tone loud and theatrical. "This passenger," he said, gesturing broadly to Zayden, "is interfering with crew operations and—" The lie was stopped mid-sentence. Zayden stepped forward, not quickly, but smoothly, and in a single controlled motion, bent the coiled mic cord over the sharp corner of the tray table edge and snapped it clean in half. The sound of tearing plastic followed. Gasps erupted from the passengers. Some lifted their phones instinctively, wondering if Zayden had finally retaliated. But no escalation came. Zayden simply held the broken cord in one hand, dropped it on the cart, and looked Carrick dead in the eyes. "No more lies," Zayden said, voice low and steady. Carrick lunged, not with a punch, but to grab Zayden's arm, perhaps to stage a scuffle, to provoke a reaction. But Zayden didn't flinch. He placed a firm hand on Carrick's chest and gently pushed him back, not roughly, but with finality. He turned to the cabin, raising his voice just enough. "Keep filming. All of you." It wasn't a plea. It was a strategy. Overhead, a sharp chime sounded, followed by blinking orange light. "Turbulence alert." The captain's voice, tight with stress, broke through the backup intercom. "All crew, take your jump seats immediately. This is non-optional. Secure the cabin." Carrick hesitated. Then, in front of everyone, he shouted, "This passenger tampered with the equipment. He triggered the alert." It was a desperate lie, louder than the truth, but not heavier. Everyone had just witnessed the calm before the alert. Everyone had seen Zayden move with intention, not chaos. Cameras were still recording. Jaren stood stunned, unable to believe Carrick would lie so shamelessly under watchful eyes. Zayden said nothing. He simply looked at Carrick, not with rage, but with something worse. Clarity. He was reading him like a system scan. The sweat, the panicked outbursts, the refusal to sit. This wasn't arrogance. This was fear. The light flickered once, briefly. A second tremor rocked the cabin, but the aircraft held stable. Zayden didn't blink. He murmured under his breath, barely loud enough for Jaren to hear. "Time to expose what's really happening. His lies won't survive this flight." The cabin jolted slightly. The fasten seatbelt signs blinked above as the aircraft dipped gently through a pocket of mild turbulence, but not enough to unsettle most passengers. And yet, Carrick Vale flinched as if bracing for impact, his face tightening unnaturally. In row 2A, Dr. Zayden Marrick didn't move. His left hand steadied the armrest while his right extended without hesitation to shield an elderly man across the aisle who had jerked upright in surprise. Around them, passengers gasped softly, not at the turbulence, but at the contrast. One crew member unraveling, and one passenger embodying control. Carrick's face had turned blotchy with a mix of panic and something darker. He stumbled forward, fumbling with the beverage cart he'd abandoned earlier, knocking a plastic cup onto the carpet. Eyes tracked him now, not with confusion, but growing suspicion. Phones remained steady in hands, quietly recording. Zayden's gaze was surgical, focused, still as a tide waiting to rise. Then Jaren Kaur, the young attendant with nervous eyes, brushed past him with practiced innocence and slipped something into his palm. A folded slip of paper, small enough to go unnoticed. Zayden opened it below tray level with a single motion. Check his left pocket. Record everything. Zayden didn't react outwardly, but the temperature of his focus dropped a degree colder. He slipped the note into his suit sleeve and leaned back slightly, as if relaxed. Across the aisle, Carrick raised his voice again. "You've been disrupting crew protocol this entire flight," he barked, his voice straining to sound authoritative. "We have procedures, and you're crossing lines." Zayden stood slowly. "Then let's make the line clear," he said evenly, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "What are you hiding in your left pocket?" Carrick's face twitched. "Don't you dare accuse me of—" "I'm not accusing," Zayden cut in. "I'm asking." The silence in the cabin deepened. It wasn't fear, it was anticipation. Carrick's volume rose in response, as if he believed he could shout reality into bending. "This passenger is attempting to intimidate me. This is interference with flight operations." But even as he spoke, his hand moved toward his left pocket. Zayden took a single step forward. That's when the intercom crackled overhead. A different voice, low but clearly urgent. "Dr. Marrick, please report to the cockpit." Immediately, a beat of silence. Even Carrick turned, stunned. Zayden looked directly at him. "Excuse me," he said, and moved forward down the aisle. Phones rose behind him like dominoes, capturing his every step. Carrick threw out an arm, but Jaren stepped in his way, blocking him gently but firmly with one hand against the galley wall. "Carrick," Jaren said, his voice soft but firm. "Let him through." Carrick froze. It wasn't just the act, it was the betrayal. His eyes widened at the realization that his grip on control was slipping. Zayden passed through the barrier without breaking stride. The cockpit door clicked open just wide enough for him to slip inside. Captain Ren Vale's face was pale. His hands rested on the edge of the console, but it wasn't the turbulence that shook him. "I didn't know who else to call," he muttered. "What's going on?" Zayden asked, eyes scanning the cockpit. Captain Vale hesitated, then motioned toward a pile of shredded paper on the co-pilot's side. "This was slipped under the door this morning before boarding. One of the crewmen found it later." Zayden leaned down, reassembling enough to read the top lines. The first legible sentence hit like a gust. "Carrick Vale, flagged for behavioral misconduct, crew instability, and falsified evaluations." It was dated 3 months ago. He looked back at the captain. "Why is he on this flight?" "He wasn't," Vale said, voice nearly cracking. "He was swapped in last minute. I was told it came from above. I didn't question it." Zayden's jaw tightened. "And you didn't report it?" "I was warned not to escalate anything related to his record," the captain said, glancing toward the instruments. "They said it would be handled internally. I didn't want to lose my post." Zayden didn't respond right away. He stared down at the shredded paper, then up at the captain. His instincts aligned with something he'd suspected the moment the slap landed. This wasn't personal. It was orchestrated. Someone protected him, Zayden said, and he knew this flight was being watched. That slap, it was panic, not impulse. Captain Vale nodded grimly. "Why me?" Zayden asked. Vale exhaled through his nose. "Because someone didn't want you to finish your inspection quietly." Zayden turned to the door. "Seal the flight deck, lock down the logs, and prepare to speak on record." Then he stepped back into the cabin. The door whispered shut behind him. Every head turned toward him like compass needles to north. Zayden's eyes scanned the passengers, the phones, the frozen mask of denial still plastered on Carrick's face. And he said, in a voice sharp enough to cut through the cabin's pressure, Now I understand why he's afraid. Fear is the first sign of a hidden truth. Carrick's footsteps echoed too sharply for a carpeted floor. Pacing just outside the galley, his hands twitched at his sides like static tension begging for release. Zayden didn't follow immediately. He sat instead, watching the man move like a trapped animal, scanning the cabin not for assistance, but for an exit that didn't exist. The air was tight with expectation. Passengers leaned back into their seats, phones still recording, eyes darting between the two men without blinking. Then Carrick turned sharply and walked toward Zayden. His face held the shape of an apology, but his eyes betrayed the tremor of a rehearsed performance. He stopped at row 2, just beside Zayden's seat, cleared his throat a little too loud, and spoke for the entire cabin to hear. "I want to apologize," Carrick began, voice unsteady, hands clasped in front of him in a mimicry of professionalism. "There was a misunderstanding earlier, and I regret that it escalated. My behavior was not reflective of Skirich standards." Zayden didn't respond. He didn't nod, didn't blink, just watched, silent as stone. And that silence was more effective than any accusation. It left Carrick hanging in a vacuum, suspended and shrinking, until the performance began to crack. Carrick's fingers started fidgeting. His heel bounced once. Then he stepped back, visibly confused that his script had failed. The silence broke, unexpectedly, not from Zayden, but from behind him. "I recognize that man," said a voice, low but firm. Zayden turned. So did half the cabin. A man in his late 40s stood slowly from the seat behind Zayden, his Skirich travel lanyard still visible around his neck. He had the calm posture of someone used to being heard, not just seen. "My name's Arvin Lore," the man said evenly. "I used to work for Skirich's internal safety division." Carrick's expression collapsed into raw panic. "I know him," Arvin continued, pointing a finger. "He was flagged under a program that was shut down crew behavioral compliance. That man's name is in our files." The cabin erupted into murmurs. Phones angled sharply toward the confrontation. "Sit down," Carrick barked, voice cracking, stepping forward with an open hand raised like a warning. But Arvin didn't budge. His voice remained steady. "That program encouraged flight staff to provoke passengers under stress, to push limits, to record reactions as part of psychological stress testing." Zayden stood now. The connection formed instantly in his mind. The slap, the mic, the provocation disguised as authority. It hadn't been random. It had been orchestrated. "Are you saying," Zayden said carefully, eyes locked on Arvin, "that this assault may have been part of a deliberate test?" Arvin hesitated, just enough to confirm the stakes. "I'm saying," he nodded slowly, "that Carrick Vale was one of the last people flagged under that program. He was deemed unstable, but someone reinstated him anyway." A beat passed. Carrick's face went pale. His breath came in short, sharp bursts, the look of someone watching a house of cards finally collapse under its own weight. He lunged forward, not at Zayden, but toward Arvin. Zayden stepped in his path. The two men stood chest to chest now, separated by a breath and a decision. Carrick's fists trembled at his sides, but he didn't raise them. Instead, he stepped back, backpedaling toward the galley with fear now visible in every muscle. His shoulders hunched, his mouth slightly open like he was choking on words too dangerous to say. Zayden didn't follow him this time either. He let the weight of the moment settle on its own. Then he turned to face the passengers. "Record everything," Zayden said calmly, eyes scanning the cabin. "Because what you're witnessing isn't just misconduct. It's the collapse of a cover-up." The hum of the engines grew louder as if amplifying his words. Phones angled higher. The truth was no longer hiding in shadows. It was being pulled inch by inch into the open. Zayden turned back toward Carrick, who now hovered in the galley entrance, caught between a wall and the end of his script. There was nowhere left to go. Zayden walked toward him slowly, not threateningly, but with the unmistakable control of a man who had already calculated the next 10 steps. Carrick leaned against the side panel, eyes darting to the exit door as if considering the impossible. But the plane was still in the air, and the altitude offered no escape. Zayden stopped just short of him and said quietly enough for only Carrick to hear, "This flight will reveal everything." And as Carrick swallowed hard, Zayden added the words that would hang like steel in the cabin's memory. "The sky has no place for hidden agendas." Carrick lunged into the galley with the look of a man cornered by his own lies. The door didn't slam shut. It hovered halfway, trembling on its hinges as if even it sensed the rising tension. Murmurs spread like ripples through the cabin, not from chaos, but from something more unsettling: clarity. Every passenger had witnessed enough to know this flight was no longer about travel. It was about truth. Phones remained raised, some shaking slightly in nervous hands, but all pointed toward the back of the aircraft where something irreversible was unfolding. Zayden Marwick didn't rush. He didn't speak. He simply stood from his seat like time had slowed to meet him. Calm washed over his posture. Measured steps carried him forward as though each movement had been calculated long before the wheels left the ground. His eyes scanned the aisle, not for threat, but for intent. He saw none. Only silent observers. Yet somewhere in the galley, a man was unraveling. A low buzz preceded a flicker as the cabin lights dimmed, a soft pulse of turbulence nudging the aircraft. It wasn't enough to unseat anyone, but it painted the scene with tension, like a storm waiting to break behind the clouds. Jaren Kaur, young, jittery, but brave, stepped close and whispered without making eye contact. "It's in his left pocket," he murmured. "A device. He uses it to wipe bodycam logs. It auto-deletes if he panics." Zayden didn't react. His jaw tightened slightly, but his eyes never moved from the corridor ahead. Every second counted now. Carrick was reckless, but not stupid. He was likely trying to hide or destroy something vital. Zayden resumed walking, each step deliberate. When he passed row 3, an older man shifted aside to let him through. In row 4, a teenage boy turned his phone sideways to film in landscape. The cabin wasn't resisting him, it was making way. A sudden movement. Carrick appeared at the galley threshold and hurled a water bottle down the aisle. Zayden's hand shot out without hesitation. The bottle struck his palm and stopped midair. It didn't drop. He caught it with such fluid control that passengers gasped. Not from fear, but awe. He set the bottle on a side tray and kept walking. In the galley, Carrick was breathing hard. Sweat beaded down his temples. His hand fumbled toward the trash compartment, elbow jerking as he dug deep, too deep for it to be simple waste. Zayden's voice, low but clear, cut the air like a wire. "Step away." Carrick didn't listen. His hand shoved deeper into the compartment, rattling metal, crinkling plastic, a sound too chaotic for something as mundane as trash. Zayden moved in. One stride, then another. The aisle now behind him. Only him, Carrick, and whatever secret lay between them. In a motion honed by instinct more than aggression, Zayden reached forward, seized Carrick's wrist, and twisted just enough to stop the action. Not enough to hurt, just enough to halt. Carrick recoiled, but it was too late. The black device emerged from the pocket as Zayden lifted it free. Small, rectangular, blinking red. The crowd inhaled. A single, synchronized breath. "What is that?" Someone whispered behind a phone lens. Carrick's voice erupted. "He's attacking me. You all saw it." "No," said a man in row 5, rising slightly. "We saw everything." "You're lying." Another voice, this time from the middle rows. "Keep filming. Don't stop." Zayden raised the device. His thumb hovered over a tiny screen. One button glowed beneath the blinking red light. Auto purge active. His eyes narrowed. One press. The red glow vanished. The logs were saved. The evidence Carrick tried to destroy was now preserved. Forever. The intercom buzzed overhead. "This is your captain," the voice stammered. "Carrick Vale, return to your seat immediately. That is a direct order." Carrick didn't move. His eyes darted to the cockpit like a child denied a final plea. Then, in a moment that shattered any illusion of self-control, he bolted forward, pushing past the galley divider, attempting to rush the cockpit. Zayden stepped in, not with force, with presence. He didn't yell. He didn't shove. He simply moved, blocking the narrow corridor, squaring his shoulders just enough to make passage impossible. Carrick stumbled back like he'd run into a wall. The cabin behind them remained still, suspended in silence. Zayden leaned in, voice like a blade drawn without anger. No more running. Carrick's eyes widened. His lips trembled. He stared at the man who had not only exposed his lies but now stood as the immovable threshold between guilt and escape. Zayden didn't blink, and Carrick finally understood he wasn't escaping this flight. He was arriving at the truth. The truth always catches the one who fears it most. Carrick Vale froze mid-step, caught between Zayden Marwick and the cockpit door as if he'd reached the end of a runway with nowhere left to land. Every camera in the cabin was pointed his way. The tension thickened like pressure at altitude, inescapable and suffocating. Passengers whispered behind their screens, phones angled like shields of truth, but none dared to speak. All eyes flicked between the trembling flight attendant and the comm man holding a blinking black device in his hand. Zayden Marwick. The slap had been only the beginning. This was now the reckoning. Zayden didn't speak. He didn't have to. His stillness, his posture, upright, composed, unmoved by the chaos, spoke volumes louder than the outburst that had shattered the cabin's peace earlier. The small device in his palm pulsed like a heartbeat, proof of Carrick's desperation and deception. The weight of what it recorded pressed down on the air itself. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom, tone tight with tension, but his words betrayed something deeper, a quiet submission. "Mr. Marwick, would you kindly help escort the attendant back to the jump seat?" Passengers blinked. The request, though formally worded, acknowledged what no one dared say aloud. Zayden, the assaulted man, had become the stabilizer of the flight. A moment passed. Then Zayden stepped forward, not aggressive, not triumphant, just steady. Carrick took a panicked half-step back, sweat glinting on his forehead under the dim overhead lights. His voice cracked as he muttered, "You don't understand. I was set up. The airline. They told me you were a risk. They said you were one of those passengers who needed testing." Zayden's brow furrowed slightly, but his tone remained level. "Testing?" Carrick's eyes darted, seeking escape in every corner of the fuselage, but finding none. They said you were a compliance threat, that I had to provoke a response, that someone important was watching." The whispers around the cabin shifted into murmurs of disbelief. A man seated near the emergency exit shook his head slowly, mouthing, "They set him up?" Another began typing feverishly into his phone. The buzz of silent outrage began to build, but Zayden raised one hand, quieting the cabin without a word. "Who told you that?" Zayden asked softly, stepping closer. "Who gave the order?" Carrick's lips trembled. His jaw clenched. He shook his head. "I can't. If I say the name, I'm finished. Or worse." Zayden studied him, his gaze sharp but not cruel. "You're already finished if you don't." For a moment, Carrick looked ready to speak. But instead, he broke emotionally and physically. His voice cracked into a wail as tears sprang from his eyes. "I didn't want to do it. I just needed the job. I did what I was told." His cry echoed against the walls of the plane, but it didn't land with sympathy. Not anymore. Jaren Kaur, the younger attendant who had been watching from a few feet away, stepped forward. His voice was firm but even, cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "He said that before, to excuse what he did to other passengers. This isn't the first time." Carrick flinched like he'd been struck, and several passengers gasped. The curtain had lifted, and now everyone could see behind it. Then the plane dipped sharply. A jolt of turbulence struck, not violent but sudden enough to knock Carrick off balance. He staggered forward, heading directly into Zayden's space. In a single, practiced movement, Zayden reached out and steadied him, not with force, but with precision, like a man guiding someone out of chaos instead of deeper into it. The motion was gentle, controlled, and utterly disarming. Even now, after all that had happened, Zayden chose to protect. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Not the passengers. Not Jaren. Not even Carrick. Zayden's voice, when it came, was low. So low that only Carrick could hear it. You hit me while announcing drinks, but your biggest mistake wasn't the slap. It was trusting the wrong people. Carrick's breath caught. His eyes widened, the realization sinking in fully for the first time. He hadn't just made a mistake. He'd been used, played, weaponized by someone higher up. Zayden didn't gloat. He didn't shout. Instead, he turned to Jaren, his voice once more composed and clear. Prepare the documentation. Jaren nodded immediately, moving toward the forward cabin to begin gathering statements and time-stamped footage from the passengers. And as Carrick slumped into the wall near the jump seat, stunned and wordless, Zayden remained where he was, calm, centered, unshaken. The moment of full exposure wasn't just coming. It was already knocking on the cockpit door. A pawn only survives until the truth reaches the board. The jolt came fast. Sharp turbulence rattled the aircraft, sending a metallic shiver through the cabin walls. Oxygen masks didn't drop, but hearts did. The descent had begun. The lights above dimmed to a cool, bluish glow as the captain's voice crackled through the intercom, instructing passengers to return their seats to the upright position and fasten their belts. Phones remained clutched tightly in trembling hands, every lens focused on the front of the plane, where the real story unfolded. Zayden Marwick stood at the edge of the forward galley, just behind the cockpit partition. His shoulders were squared, hands calm at his sides, but every inch of him was alert. He could feel it, the cabin holding its collective breath, the silence heavy with judgment, fear, and anticipation. In his pocket, the confiscated black device pulsed faintly. It had tried to delete itself minutes ago. Failed. And Zayden knew it held more than just data, it held leverage. Carrick Vale sat strapped into the jump seat near the galley bulkhead, but his body language was anything but restrained. His legs bounced erratically, his fists clenched and unclenched. The safety buckle trembled under the pressure of his shaking hands. Sweat ran down his temple, catching the edge of his collar as he whispered something under his breath, over and over. Rothan, Rothan, Rothan. The name drifted through the air like a secret not meant to escape. But it did. Jaren Kaur, the junior flight attendant who had quietly sided with Zayden earlier, was now seated 2 rows back. He heard it. He pulled a service notepad from his vest pocket and scribbled the name with a trembling hand, then looked up, locking eyes with Zayden. A subtle nod passed between them. Zayden turned toward the intercom, lifted the handset calmly, and spoke with a voice that carried command without shouting. This is Zayden Marwick. Prepare ground authorities. We have confirmed criminal activity on board. Gasps scattered through the cabin. Someone whispered, "He's in charge." Another voice asked, "Is he an agent?" No one had an answer, but no one questioned him anymore. The captain's voice came back, nervous and uncertain. "Roger that, Mr. Marwick. Ground is preparing law enforcement. Copy that." Carrick suddenly lunged. The motion was erratic, born of desperation, not strategy. One moment he was trembling in his seat, the next he twisted hard to the side, reaching toward Zayden's jacket. It was chaos wrapped in silence. No screams. Just the sharp intake of breath from 20 passengers who couldn't believe what they were seeing. Zayden had already seen it coming. With surgical speed, he stepped slightly sideways, allowing Carrick's hand to slide past him. Then he pivoted. His left hand caught the crewman's forearm mid-reach. No force, just placement. His right hand guided Carrick's shoulder back toward the jump seat, folding him neatly into place like a man pressing a chess piece back onto its square. The click of the buckle echoed louder than it should have. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then light applause trickled from the rows behind. Quiet, uncertain, but full of respect. Zayden didn't react. He simply looked at Carrick with a level gaze. "A job built on fear," he said softly, "collapses faster than trust ever will." Carrick's head slumped forward. For the first time, he looked less like an aggressor and more like a man lost in a game he never controlled. The cabin lights shifted again. Through the windows, runway lights appeared like a trail of fire cutting through the night. The descent was nearly complete. Jaren approached from behind and leaned in close to whisper, "Authorities are confirmed. They're already waiting by the jet bridge," they said. "Full investigative team." Xaden nodded, slowly. His fingers brushed the edge of the device in his pocket one last time, checking it without revealing it. Still intact, still blinking, still holding the truth. The nose of the aircraft dipped slightly. Wheels ready, brakes primed. The entire cabin now sat in a kind of reverent stillness, passengers no longer watching out the window but forward, where one man had turned a moment of humiliation into a mission for accountability. Xaden stood still as the ground rushed up to meet them, his breath calm, his mind sharp. He wasn't just waiting for the landing. He was waiting for the reckoning. Landing won't end this. It will only begin the reckoning. He smirked, confident in his control, unaware that every witness, every camera, and every ounce of composure had already been leveraged to dismantle his authority. If you believe cruelty under a uniform always collapses when faced with calculated retaliation, hit subscribe now, because justice never hesitates. The wheels struck the tarmac with a deep, echoing roar. The cabin jolted gently, and all eyes remained fixed on the front, the silence deafening as the aircraft decelerated. No one spoke. Phones kept rolling. The atmosphere was suspended somewhere between anticipation and disbelief, like the final beat of a symphony before its last note. Carrick Vale clutched the jump seat armrests as if the metal might save him, his knuckles a pale shade of panic. Sweat traced a trembling path down his temple. The moment the plane touched down, his illusion of control shattered. Reality was now unspooling faster than he could hold together. Xaden Marrick stood just beyond the galley curtain, his posture calm, composed, but his eyes sharp as a scalpel. The black auto-purge device was secured in his jacket pocket, blinking silently, a vault of incriminating truth Carrick had desperately tried to erase. But now it pulsed like a heartbeat of evidence, protected and waiting. Xaden's mind raced with clarity, not emotion. His objective was clear. No leaks, no chaos, no interference. This truth would land clean. Then came the voice. The intercom crackled, brittle and distorted, as the aircraft rolled to a slow crawl on the runway. "This is Venner Ground Control. Requesting direct line with Inspector Marrick." The words fell like thunder across the cabin. Gasps erupted. A few passengers dropped their phones in stunned realization. Even Jaren froze mid-buckle, eyes wide. "Inspector?" someone whispered. Carrick's head snapped toward Xaden so hard it looked painful. His mouth parted, but no sound came out, only the faint wheeze of disbelief. The fear in his body now found a shape, a name. All this time he thought he had slapped a businessman. But Xaden Marrick wasn't just the CEO of Arathon Systems. He was a federal aviation inspector, undercover, certified, authorized. And everything Carrick had done was now a report waiting to be written. Xaden reached calmly for the intercom button by the front panel and pressed it. "This is Marrick. I confirm identity. Lock the jet bridge until I issue clearance. I am securing a federal witness and investigative asset on board. No ground contact without my directive." The authority in his voice cut through the fuselage like a blade. The captain, who had been silent since his last trembled announcement, keyed into the internal crew channel. "Copy that, Inspector. Jet bridge on hold. Ground is standing by." Carrick made one final plea. His voice strained over the main intercom as he pressed its button in desperation. "Captain, please, let me explain before they come in. Just 5 minutes. I need to." "Denied?" The captain replied flatly, with more resolve than before. "Remain in your seat, Carrick." A whimper broke from Carrick's throat. His hands trembled as he sank further into the jump seat. But the worst wasn't over. Not yet. Xaden turned slightly, enough for his voice to carry, but not loud enough to panic the passengers. "He's not done unraveling," he said softly to Jaren, who stood nearby, eyes alert. "They'll want every second of this. The plane finally slowed to a full stop. Through the oval windows, emergency lights flashed blue and red across the tarmac. Law enforcement vehicles pulled into formation around the aircraft like a steel embrace. A mobile operations unit approached the jet bridge, its lights cold and unblinking. No escape. Carrick began to sob, first in staggered gasps, then in full collapse. His frame curled into the seat, as if folding himself would make him disappear. He said I'd be safe, he muttered into his hands. He said they'd never trace it. Zayden didn't move. He watched, calculating, waiting for the final lock to fall into place. Passengers across the rows now looked at him with a mix of awe and gratitude. Some nodded silently. Others whispered blessings under their breath. But none interrupted. They knew they were watching the close of a chapter they'd tell for years. Zayden stepped forward, gently adjusting his coat to ensure the device was visible. Then he turned to Carrick, who was now shaking so badly that his seatbelt jingled softly like chains. Their eyes met, not in anger, not even in triumph, just closure. "It's time," Zayden said, his voice quiet but final. "No flight can escape accountability once the truth lands." The aircraft door hissed open with a pressurized gasp, breaking the tense silence that had hung over the cabin like a storm cloud. Two uniformed investigators from the Venner Aviation Council stepped aboard without hesitation. Their boots landed with heavy precision against the aircraft floor, echoing like gavel strikes across the aisle. The lead investigator, a tall, sharp-eyed man with a firm jawline and a black data case tucked under his arm, made eye contact with no one, until he locked eyes with Zayden Marrick. Zayden stood quietly, already waiting near the forward galley, his shoulders squared, posture calm but unyielding. Without a word, he reached into his inner jacket and removed the black auto-purge device. He handed it directly to the lead investigator. "Inspector Torin Vale," Zayden said with cool clarity. "This holds everything." Torin accepted the device and nodded once, his expression unreadable. The air in the cabin thickened with anticipation. Carrick Vale, still trembling in the jump seat, attempted to speak. They don't know the whole story. This isn't what it looks like," he stammered, his voice a jagged whisper trying to rebuild credibility that had long since crumbled. But no one moved. No one responded. The passengers remained in their seats, silent and recording, their phones steady in their hands. Every lens was aimed at the man who had once slapped Zayden in full view, and who now looked like a child caught holding a match beside a burning barn. Dramatic irony pulsed through the room. Carrick had believed himself in command just hours ago. He'd strutted through the aisles with his mic and forced smile, assuming dominance through routine. Now, the very man he assaulted had not only contained the chaos but now stood beside federal agents, turning over hard evidence with surgical calm. Zayden glanced at Jaren, who stepped up beside him, nodding in silent support. "Ready to testify, sir," Jaren said, his voice steady but tight with nervous energy. Torin gave a curt nod. "Escort the crew member," he ordered. Two agents approached Carrick. He resisted slightly, then slumped into an aisle seat near the middle of the cabin, head bowed. They activated a portable scanner and connected it to the device Zayden had surrendered. As the logs loaded, the cabin screens flickered with a synchronized signal from the investigator's terminal. Beep, beep. A new message surfaced on the monitor. Command trigger received. 14 hours, 17 minutes, and 34 seconds. Subject ID, KM 412. Directive, initiate compliance stress test on passenger row 2A. Gasps sliced through the air like sudden turbulence. A shiver ran through the cabin. Carrick's face turned gray. "It wasn't random," Zayden said, quietly but clearly enough for the entire front half of the plane to hear. "He was told to provoke me." Torin turned toward him, brows tightening. "And why would someone want to do that?" Zayden looked him directly in the eye, voice unwavering. "Because I was evaluating this airline for its safety certification renewal. Discreetly, someone found out and decided to sabotage my report before it reached the regulators." Even the investigators looked startled. The revelation wasn't just explosive, it reframed the entire flight. A collective murmur spread through the passengers. They hadn't just witnessed an assault. They'd witnessed the unraveling of an organized manipulation. From the back of the aircraft, Jaren suddenly spoke up. He kept muttering a name, he said, stepping forward. Rothan. Over and over. Torin turned. Rothan? You're sure? I wrote it down, Jaren replied, producing a note. He was whispering it like a shield. Carrick jolted in his seat, rage and fear colliding in his eyes. Rothan promised me protection. He said if I followed instructions, I'd be fine. The outburst confirmed everything. The passengers stared, stunned. Phones captured every flinch of Carrick's unraveling. Silence, Torin said firmly, holding up his hand. You will speak when authorized. Zayden stepped forward again, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. That message, the name Rothan, it connects to someone inside the airline's core leadership. I don't need access to the executive board to know who orchestrated this. They've used these tests before. This time, they used the wrong passenger. Jaren nodded. He wasn't the first target, but he's the first to fight back in front of this many cameras. One by one, the passengers were released from their seats, row by row. As they passed, many paused to offer soft words of thanks to Zayden. Some placed hands over their hearts. A few offered brief nods of solemn respect. The man who had remained calm while chaos screamed around him had not only protected the flight, he had protected the truth. Torin approached Zayden at the door, still holding the device. You said this was only part of a bigger problem, he asked. You think it goes higher? Zayden stared down the terminal, his expression unreadable but filled with focused intent. I don't think it, he said. I know it. Torin gave him a nod of mutual understanding. Then we'll follow it wherever it leads. Behind them, the last passenger stepped off the plane. Carrick remained seated, guarded, alone. Every thread of control he had once possessed now dissolved into the fabric of a larger investigation. Zayden stood in the doorway for a final moment, eyes locked on the tarmac ahead, already calculating what must come next. The slap was only the spark. The fire was planned long before. The door clicked shut behind them with a finality that echoed louder than the sound itself. Inside the secure terminal room, the atmosphere was sterile but charged, as if the walls themselves anticipated something irreversible. Zayden Marrick sat upright in the metal-backed chair, eyes locked with investigator Torin Vale across the narrow conference table. A small camera lens glowed red in the corner, silently recording every second. No small talk. No delay. Begin recording, Torin said sharply, pressing a button beside him. The overhead lights cast sharp shadows as the room settled into a tense silence. Zayden spoke first, his voice steady but taut. Zayden Marrick, reporting witness and involved party. Flight 412. Further down the table, Carrick Vale sat hunched, hands clasped tightly, his knees bouncing under the surface like pistons of fear. He kept glancing toward the door, not out of curiosity, but hope, as though someone might yet walk in and make all of this disappear. That hope crumbled when Torin slid a file forward. Skirich's internal flight logs show a swap, Torin said, flipping open the folder. You weren't rostered for Flight 412, Mr. Vale. You weren't supposed to be anywhere near that aircraft. Carrick didn't answer. His breathing grew shallow. Zayden watched him carefully, arms folded. His objective had shifted from defense to dismantling the invisible shield that had protected Carrick up until now. We cross-referenced authorization codes, Torin continued, tapping the page. Your flight swap was approved with an override signature only available to senior executives. Carrick's lips parted but produced no sound. A single bead of sweat slid down the side of his face. Finally, his voice cracked through the silence. I was told, he stammered. I was told he nodded toward Zayden, wasn't just a passenger. They said he was evaluating how crew handled racial tension. They said it was a test. Zayden didn't even blink. I've never conducted tests on passengers, he said evenly. Only crew. Only protocols. Nothing else. Carrick's face twisted with confusion. But they told me, Rothan told me. Torrin's fingers froze mid-page. Rothan? He echoed. Carrick fell silent, suddenly realizing he had spoken too much. Too late. From a briefcase beside him, Torrin retrieved the black auto-purge device seized from Carrick mid-flight. He connected it to a secured tablet and turned it toward Zayden. Encrypted files, he explained. We cracked one. Take a look. Zayden leaned forward slowly. The document on screen bore a header strip of identifiers, except for one signature line at the bottom. Approved. Rothenvale, Crew Operations. Zayden's jaw tightened, but he remained composed. Rothenvale, he said quietly. That's not a real name. It's a protocol alias. Torrin frowned. You recognize it?
Ido, Zayden replied.
It's been used before to sign off on shadow directives inside Skirich. The man behind it is Rexton Vale, Director of Crew Operations. The door to the room opened, and Rexton Vale stepped inside. He wore a tight-lipped smile, as if stepping onto a stage. Apologies for the delay, he said smoothly, closing the door behind him. I was told there was a matter requiring my oversight. Carrick tensed instantly, nearly leaping from his chair. Rexton, he blurted, voice caught between pleading and panic. Zayden remained seated, silent. He had anticipated this moment, prepared for it. Rexton took a seat without invitation, casually resting his palms on the table. I heard there were questions about flight protocol. I'd like to offer support. Torrin didn't speak. He simply rotated the tablet, letting Rexton see the file displayed. The shift was immediate. Rexton's eyes narrowed, his breath hitched. His fingers curled slightly, as if resisting the urge to snatch the device. But the signature encryption key was unmistakable. It was his. He leaned back slowly, trying to salvage control. Anyone could have forged that file. Zayden leaned forward, hands folded, gaze locked. You didn't test me, Rexton. You exposed yourself. Rexton lunged for the door. It was instinctual, clumsy, desperate, and utterly futile. The investigators moved faster. Two of them intercepted him before he could even touch the handle, arms gripping him with practiced precision. The metal badge clipped to Investigator Torrin's belt caught the fluorescent light as he stepped forward, voice like cold steel. You're not going anywhere, Mr. Vale. Carrick, seated at the end of the table, erupted. Tell them the truth. His voice cracked into something wild, accusatory, pleading. His eyes were bloodshot, flicking between Rexton and Zayden like a man watching the last threads of a crumbling illusion snap. Rexton didn't respond. He slowly straightened his suit jacket, regaining composure. The file is fake, he said coolly, his voice sharpened by arrogance. Anyone could have doctored a file and attached my name, but the irony was too thick to ignore. The system Rexton once used to rewrite logs and silence complaints had finally turned against him. Torrin didn't flinch. He reached into his folder and pulled out a printed report, metadata logs. Every keystroke tied to your override code. Timestamped. Verified by Skirich's own audit logs. You forged crew assignments. You bypassed safety clearance. You authorized the override to force Carrick Vale onto Flight 412. Rexton's lips thinned. For the first time, he didn't have a quick retort. Zayden remained seated, hands folded neatly on the table in front of him. He didn't gloat. He didn't speak. His silence was louder than judgment, a steady weight that made the room feel smaller. He had no interest in theatrics, only truth. There's more, said one of the junior analysts. He tapped at a control panel near the side screen. Footage from the lounge this morning. The screen blinked to life. The video was grainy but unmistakable. There, in a narrow hallway lined with lockers and folding chairs, was Rexton handing a small black object to Carrick. The same device Zayden had seized mid-flight. Rexton's body tensed as the footage played. Carrick's head dropped, his hands rising slowly to cover his face. That's enough, Zayden said quietly, not to protect Rexton, but to signal that the truth had been made undeniable. He stood slowly, shoulders broad, voice calm. My testimony remains the same. Every action, every word, every incident, from gate to cabin to cockpit. It all points to a deliberate breach of ethical and procedural standards. Torin turned to him. Your clarity is appreciated, Inspector Marrick. Carrick whimpered, voice small now. He said it was just a test, that I wouldn't get in trouble, that I was protecting the airline. Zayden's eyes didn't waver. You allowed yourself to become the weapon of someone else's fear, and fear has a price. Rexton shifted, muttering, You've ruined everything. Zayden's gaze held him. No hatred, no triumph, only truth. Truth ruins only what is built on deceit. There was silence, a final pause as Rexton was placed in cuffs. His breath hitched once, then nothing. Jaren stepped into the room, holding his witness report. His eyes moved between Zayden and Carrick, then settled on the chair beside Zayden's. May I? Zayden nodded. Jaren sat, the pen in his hand shaking just slightly. I've been meaning to say. Jaren began, unsure if now was the right time. Back there, after the slap. How did you stay so calm? The air felt still again, like a question deeper than curiosity. Zayden glanced down at the silver plaque on the edge of the table labeled Aviation Ethics Committee Witness Station. Then he met Jaren's gaze and said, Calmness is strength, especially when truth is within reach. Chaos only wins when truth hesitates. The screen above Gate 9 flickered with breaking headlines before the passengers of Flight 412 had even cleared the terminal. A looped montage replayed Zayden Merrick's controlled hand catching the thrown water bottle midair, the stunned faces of passengers, and the crack of a microphone cord snapping clean across a tray table. Footage, once filmed in fear, was now broadcast in awe. Below the screen, reporters swarmed, pushing for statements from any disembarking passenger willing to speak. But Zayden Marrick wasn't among them. He stood in a private briefing room several gates away, where no cameras were allowed, facing a semicircle of federal aviation regulators. Fluorescent lights hummed low above their heads, but the tension in the room buzzed louder. You understand why we called this emergency session, said lead regulator Anton Marev, a gray-templed man with tired eyes and a folder full of damning evidence. We've never seen a crew protocol breach this blatant, nor this well-documented. Zayden nodded, his voice steady. You don't need to convince me of the urgency. The evidence speaks for itself. But if you want to prevent this from ever happening again, we can't just remove a few bad actors. We need to dismantle the loopholes that let them in. He placed a printed schematic of Skirich's crew management structure on the table. Lines, boxes, and codes intersected like veins, except one pathway, highlighted in red, bypassed everything and led straight to a single designation. Override Arvale. That, Zayden said, pointing, is where Rexton bypassed safety authorization and reinstated a man flagged for instability. He tapped again. And that's where he altered records to make it look routine. Regulators leaned forward. One murmured. So the system wasn't broken, it was rerouted. Exactly, Zayden replied. The design worked, until it was ignored. Outside the briefing room, the airport buzzed with news crews dissecting the scandal. Skirich's PR team, desperate to deflect, released a generic public statement by mid-morning. We fully support Inspector Merrick's dedication to passenger safety and are cooperating fully with authorities. The irony hung thick. Zayden hadn't forgotten that the same airline had silenced complaints and reinstalled a man who should have never been on board. Back inside, the regulators exchanged glances. Would you be willing to assist in drafting a new national protocol? Anton asked. We need something bulletproof, something that prevents these crew compliance tests from ever resurfacing under a different name. Zayden's answer was immediate. I already started. He pulled a thin binder from his briefcase, labeled Passenger Integrity Protocol, Draft 1. The table of contents included items like mandatory crew accountability logs, randomized third-party audits, and strict prohibition of emotional provocation training. Before anyone could respond, a knock came at the door. Jaren Kaur, still in partial uniform, entered with an uncertain expression. "Am I interrupting?" he asked. Zayden gestured him in. "Not at all." The young attendant stood straight, but his hands shook faintly. "I was told to report here," he said. I have my statement ready." One of the junior regulators smiled. "Actually, Mr. Kaur, we'd like to ask you something first." Jaren blinked. "Me? For your integrity and swift action mid-flight," Anton said. "We're offering you a temporary advisory role. Help us draft recommendations from a crew perspective." Jaren's face registered stunned disbelief, then something deeper, relief. "I'd be honored, sir." As the regulators prepared the paperwork, Zayden turned to him. "You stood up when it mattered. Never forget that." Jaren nodded, still processing what this meant. Meanwhile, in a secured holding room nearby, Carrick Vale sat in silence, his uniform rumpled, his eyes dull. For hours he had said nothing. But when Zayden entered, something shifted. "I didn't want to do it," Carrick mumbled, staring at his clasped hands. "They said if I didn't follow through, I'd be blacklisted from every airline. Rexton told me you were testing us. Testing me." Zayden didn't move closer. He stayed just inside the doorway. "Accountability doesn't begin with excuses," he said. "It begins with truth." Carrick looked up. "Then I'll tell them everything. No more hiding." Zayden gave a short nod. "Then you're finally helping the passengers you were sworn to protect." Later that afternoon, Skirich's board issued a public statement confirming the immediate restructuring of their crew management division. The announcement was vague, cautious, but the implication was clear: Rexton's power had been cut. As journalists camped outside the terminal, Zayden gave a short press statement beneath a row of airport flags. He didn't shout. He didn't condemn. He simply spoke with the voice of a man who'd seen danger from both silence and chaos, and chosen truth. No passenger should ever be provoked, tested, or targeted while entrusted to the sky. His words traveled faster than the plane he'd just stepped off. Within hours, clips from Flight 412 flooded social media. Messages poured in from across the country, from passengers thanking him, from flight crews expressing relief, and from parents, veterans, and elders who said they would fly again because of how Zayden stood firm. In a quiet corner of the Aviation Authority office, someone slipped a handwritten note into Zayden's bag. It read simply, "You reminded the sky what safety really looks like." And as night fell across the city and the last headlines scrolled past on glowing terminal screens, Zayden sat in silence, reading passengers' messages one by one. Some were long. Some were just a single word: "Thank you." His expression didn't change. But inside, he knew something had shifted, not just for him, or for Flight 412, but for everyone who stepped onto a plane with hope and trust. The skies changed today, not by chance, but by choice. The aircraft door sealed behind him, muffling the applause from the passengers still seated in the cabin. 3 months had passed since that turbulent descent and the chaos that unfolded midair. Yet today, the echoes of that moment reverberated louder than ever inside the Federal Rotunda. The room was silent as Zayden Marrick approached the stage, flanked by officials and regulatory heads. He wasn't here as a passenger anymore, not even as a CEO. He was standing at the heart of a transformation, the kind that rewrites not just policy but culture. He moved with the same calm precision he'd shown during the flight. A large display beside him bore the words Passenger Integrity Charter, now federal aviation law, forged from the very confrontation that could have cost lives if not for his control. The charter outlawed covert crew tests, psychological manipulation, and stress-based behavioral provocation protocols, once hidden beneath vague procedural jargon. Now exposed, dissected, and destroyed. Zayden didn't smile as the applause resumed. He simply nodded, the weight of responsibility etched into every line on his face. The stage lights reflected off the polished plaque he'd been handed moments before, a gift from the passengers of Flight 412. Its engraving read, "Calm made the sky safe." His fingers grazed the lettering, not out of pride, but remembrance. Every decision he made that day, every pause, every calculated action had led to this moment. In the front row, Jaren sat with quiet pride. He had traded his flight attendant uniform for a sharp council blazer, now serving as a permanent safety liaison. The transformation in him was obvious, but Zayden had seen it that day when Jaren stepped between him and Carrick without hesitation. It had been more than loyalty, it was conscience in motion. Behind him sat Torrin Vale, the investigator who had turned over every stone in the weeks following the incident, now heading the expanded oversight division formed in its aftermath. Carrick wasn't present, but his name lingered, not with vengeance, but reform. After weeks of psychiatric evaluations and testimony, Zayden had made a controversial recommendation: rehabilitation, not punishment. Carrick was now enrolled in a monitored recovery program, learning the very ethics he once undermined. Some protested the decision, but Zayden believed broken systems produce broken people, and justice, when rooted in wisdom, must offer restoration as well as accountability. The crowd hushed as Zayden stepped to the podium. No notes, no script, just a voice that had once echoed calm into a burning cabin. No passenger, he began, his voice steady, should ever be tested, provoked, or manipulated in the name of control. The sky is not a lab. It is a covenant between those who fly and those who serve. And that covenant was broken, not by a single man, but by a system built on fear, protected by silence, and fueled by disregard. He paused as flashes from cameras lit the room. His gaze found the captain from Flight 412, who sat further back, posture stiff. After the ceremony, the man approached Zayden privately, removing his cap as a sign of humility. I hesitated, he confessed. I failed in the moment. His voice was hoarse. But you didn't let it fall apart. Zayden didn't offer blame, only truth. Leadership isn't about never failing, he said softly. It's about choosing accountability when it counts. Elsewhere, Rexton's trial dominated national headlines. Testimonies confirmed what Zayden had feared: years of falsified records, suppressed complaints, and a culture that rewarded obedience over ethics. But the reckoning had begun. Reforms now rippled across multiple airlines, all forced to adopt transparent auditing, anonymous crew reporting channels, and automatic cabin incident reviews. Later that evening, as the building emptied and voices faded, Zayden returned to his office. He placed the passenger's plaque beside a stack of reports, beneath a quiet photo of Flight 412 gliding through an open sky. He stared at it, remembering the slap, the gasps, the mic cord snapping under his hand, the silence that followed. It had started with an insult and ended with a charter. A knock on the door. Jaren entered briefly, delivering updated drafts of the new safety briefings. More agencies want your help next quarter, he said. Zayden smiled faintly. Integrity doesn't end with reform, he replied, straightening the plaque. It begins again each day. He stood, slid the reports into his satchel, and walked toward the hallway bathed in late afternoon light. And as he stepped into the sunlight, calm and steady, a man whose strength reshaped an entire industry, his words remained in the room like a final vow. Justice takes flight when truth learns how to land. He struck the CEO and froze as the man broke the mic, his pride, and his contract, leaving the cabin and airline stunned before landing. If you believe true power acts decisively without shouting, subscribe now, because justice always lands first and hardest. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It highlights abuse of authority, prejudice, and the power of composure and strategic action in confronting wrongdoing. Its purpose is to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and encourage conversations about equality, accountability, and respect for every passenger.